Aloha everyone, this is Group 7's final group presentation for Biology 454, Natural History of Hawaiian Islands. Our group members are Novena, Hana, Noah, and Chisato, and we decided to create this presentation about an ecological and cultural evaluation of Puʻuloa. Our targeted audiences are the Paul Hoover National Monument Museum and travelers who visit the site. We want to start with a brief history of the island of Oahu. Due to volcanic activities, Oahu formed about 2.754 million years ago. Waianae and Kolau mountain ranges today are the remnants of the volcanoes that merged into one to create the island. The shape of the slope of these volcanoes allowed the island to have ua, rain, and vai, fresh water, through olographic lift. The freshwater flows through the gulches and into the main river channels to the south. At the end of Pleistocene Ice Age, sea level rise drowned the lower part of the river valleys, and huge shallow reefs ringing the island emerged. Oahu was lifted by the earth crust, and the southern Ewa and Kona district were exposed, creating the fan-shaped inlet. Kanakaʻoiwi Native Hawaiians named the place Ke Awalau o Puʻuloa, which means the many bays of the long hill. Lokoʻia, fish pond in Hawaii, is deeply connected to Hawaiian spirit and cultural value. From ancient times, Native Hawaiians understood the role and function of watershed and the ocean, as well as the life cycle of the aquatic species found in the area. Lokoʻia were found from Mauka to Makaisai, and the size of this pond varied from less than an acre for small family use to several hundred acres for ali'i. The fish ponds were designed in the best area by ali'i, and the kafuna, who was the priest, had well knowledge of the land geographically, including the landscape, water features, and where springs were located. Konohiki and land steward, who was the head of Ahupua'a land division systems, led the community and worked together to build the pond based on the design. These fish ponds were sustainably managed, healthy, and rich in natural resources. According to a study, the average annual yield of fish ponds on the 4 islands, including Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, and Hawaii, was estimated to be about 3,063.8 kilograms of fish per pond and 1,661.1 kilograms of fish per acre. Fish ponds in Hawaii mainly were concentrated on the Oahu, especially in the area Puʻuloa, Kaneohe, and Waikiki. Puʻuloa, one of the most important main freshwater resources in Hawaii, was valued by Hawaiians not only as food source, but spiritually. However, today most people recognize the place as Pearl Harbor, which was attacked during war. Today, Arizona Memorial is one of the most popular destinations for travelers to visit, and in 2018, about 5,000 people visited the site per day. But most visitors do not know the place was valued as Aina Momona, which is often translated into rich and plentiful land that feeds people. The place was vital for aquaculture and sacred cultural activities for Hawaiians. Until today, most of what Hawaiians valued and protected has been destroyed and heavily polluted. The ecosystem of Puʻuloa has dramatically changed over the past several hundred years. In pre-European contact times, 70% of discharged natural fresh water from a spring complex flew into Puʻuloa. The average flow was estimated to be 8 cubic meters per second. A drowned river system occurring during several glacial epochs formed Puʻuloa, and oyster bed and coral reefs flourished in the area. Along with the Waiawa Waipahu aquifer, which was an aquifer that Puʻuloa sits on, produced over 104 million gallons of water per day, making it one of the most productive aquifers in all the Hawaiian Islands. There was a high abundance of existing fish ponds and tallow field, allowing native Hawaiians to use Puʻuloa's water for extensive fish harvesting. Within Puʻuloa, 36 individual local i'a and traps existed, and 24 of them were still active, 1901, and produced 81,935 pounds of fish each year. The water quality was very high with low turbidity and little sediment and pollution. In post-European times, the majority of intact fish ponds have been destroyed due to urbanization that was caused by human activity along the shoreline and upland drainage basins. And today, there are only 3 intact fish ponds left. As a result, the water quality became very poor, containing high sediment input that sinks. Also, invasive species, including exotic and salt-tolerant mangroves and parasites and diseases were introduced and decreased the population of native species.
All right. In terms of the marine and terrestrial life of Puʻuloa, 22% of the species that currently occupy the area were introduced post-military occupancy. So roughly about, like I said, 22% of all the species that are currently in existence there were introduced from either the vessels that entered the area or any of the other post-European contact. And then of those species, there are currently 434 occupying Puʻuloa, 36 of which are algae, 1 spermatophyte, which is a seed plant. There's 338 invertebrates, which includes shellfish like oysters, and 59 different fish species. Puʻuloa was also known for its abundance of famed oysters, which the native Hawaiians called the kaia hama'o leo by the native Hawaiians, which were referred to as like the sea creatures that silence the voice strictly because of the way that they harvest them, because they had to be harvested in silence or else they would clam up or shut themselves up and disappear into the reef. So more on the marine and terrestrial life, the completion of the entrance channel, the U.S. Navy entrance channel in 1911, dramatically increased the rate of which invasives were introduced to Puʻuloa. And a lot of that included deep vessels, so these invasives would attach themselves to the bottom of these vessels and enter through the channel, which was a huge downfall to the Puʻuloa ecosystem. And a lot of those invasives had a significant impact on the ecosystem. And the population of many endangered native water birds like the Hawaiian moorhen, Hawaiian coot, and the Hawaiian duck, as well as the Hawaiian split, all of which are now endangered post-European and military contact. A lot of that was a result of habitat destruction due to the increase in urbanization and environmental contaminants as a result of the military base in Puʻuloa. And currently, there's a community effort going on to restore the PP oyster, which helps regulate water quality and increase water quality within Puʻuloa water systems. In terms of loss and dispossession for Puʻuloa, it has both physically and culturally altered the entire area and has essentially caused this great deal of animosity towards the U.S. military and essentially just the U.S. in general. And there's a huge loss in cultural practice of the land and cultural relationships with the land and the ecosystem, both the land and the historical communities involved. It's basically become unfamiliar terrain to native Hawaiians and the people who occupied it originally for pre-European contact, and basically how the U.S. Navy altered this land in terms of redirecting streams with culverts, ditches, springs disappearing left and right. Essentially, unless you were a native Hawaiian in the armed forces or you were in the Navy, basically you have no correlation with this place anymore, and a lot of Hawaiians find the place forbidding at this point. So restoration efforts are a big up and coming. should take place. So a book was written a few years back regarding this guy named Jonathan Osorio. And he mentioned this idea called the logic of exclusion, which basically focused on the Pearl Harbor Museum and how the museum itself essentially addresses more of like the patriotic ties to the bombing, less so in like the United States military association with the bombing than the actual land itself that was taken from Hawaiians way prior to the bombing. So it doesn't really address like even if you're looking something up on the internet, for example, if you're looking up like the Pearl Harbor, the first thing that comes up is the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Nothing comes up about the destruction of the land that originally came of Puʻuloa. So that's essentially what the logic of exclusion is. It essentially talks only about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and this museum only addresses the bombing and not the effect that it had inevitably on the Hawaiian land and Hawaiian people, erasing native names, access, and native rights to the land of Puʻuloa.
So with the Navy owning a bulk fuel storage facility that is named Red Hill, that consists of 20 steel line tanks holding up to 12.5 million gallons of oil. About 14,000 gallons of that oil spilled directly into Puʻuloa's tap water in January 2014, which then led to the Red Hill Administrative Order of Consent, which basically required the Navy to ensure that the Puʻuloa was protected and that the environment remained healthy. And as we know, that promise was broken.
So essentially, the image depicts the basically where this 225 million gallons of jet fuel and ship fuel is stored. It's only 100 feet above the Honolulu aquifer, which in the past there has been an eruption and a release of this jet fuel into the water system and aquifer, which has caused major distress. So that's essentially what this picture depicts of these huge tanks that are stored away just above the Honolulu aquifer.
Right, and like consequences of drinking water that contains oil is like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headaches, among other symptoms. And thousands of residents have now been harmed and hospitalized due to that oil spill. And a lot of the residents have reported that their water now smells of oil. So if Hawaiians originally had management over Puʻuloa, then they would have ensured that there were infrastructures to avoid polluting the fresh water in the marine sources. And they would have incorporated their traditions and practices of the ecosystem to ensure that it remained healthy and to continue their traditions. So now that we know that there needs to be change because Native Hawaiians have been fighting for their land against the US military for years, and the oil spill that took place at Red Hill isn't the only issue that the community has faced. There have been past events like the bombing of Kuhulave and many others that have led to Native Hawaiians protesting against the military for them to return their land back to the way that it was. So here are some websites and petitions that you can use to help get involved in restoring Puʻuloa back to how it was and getting the military to take action and help the community in restoring it back. And then here are some of our resources.
So thank you.